Good morning. And we are off with Chapter 1, Introduction to Communication in Sport. Before we dive in, the key word for this chapter, but really the entire semester, is perspective and differing perspective. As we kind of dive in and as we're discussing things this semester, let's really start to open our minds to what other people's points of view are, and not just their point of view, but the context behind their situation, which may have led them to a given point of view. I think that will help open up our minds to understand where they are and how they think about things. Let's start. Imagine, for a moment, a world without sports. This is a quote taken directly from the start of Chapter 1. And we started to discuss this last week in my kind of welcome video. But as you guys all know, we didn't have to really imagine this, or we actually lived through this from March 2020 to roughly July 2020. This was beyond a historical moment and continues to be beyond historical within our society. From the sports lens, we have never had a time in modern society where sports did not exist. We get sports on a 24/7 basis. And depending on how you want to view it, a brief moment in time, 3 months, there was really no major sports being played. So what does that mean? Sports are part of our normal lives, and without them, we lacked this normalcy. And each of us went through it. Each of us felt that lack of normalcy. And when sports were brought back to our lives, right, some more than others, that normalcy finally did start to return. I'll never forget it. I was sitting there and, oh God, what was the first major sporting event I watched? Was it a preseason basketball game? I don't remember off the top of my head the exact event. I just distinctly remember that I was excited to watch something that I don't normally watch, and that's kind of what sports really meant for me. All right, and what it really meant for many. As we are growing up, 72% of us have played individual or team sports. And then there's a larger percentage of that have at the very least played it in school or something along those lines. All right. And, we play or participate in sports for many different reasons. Your text outlines 3. I think it goes way beyond this, but, sports provides models of leadership for young kids. It builds interpersonal conflict resolution skills. My daughter, I get excited every single time she goes to play sports because, she has to engage in other people, where in a society with technology and sometimes a lack of interaction, sports removes that technological component for the most part, and you're forced to interact with other people. Additionally, sports can provide stories for inspiration, which may inspire people throughout their lives. Communication practices for sports are essential to the success of sports, and that's what this part of what this class is about. Where if we look at the popularity of given sports, whether it's the NFL, whether it's the Olympics, if you think about it, how these are conveyed and how they are consumed are absolutely critical. When we think of the NFL, which is about to start, right? Think about the first time you hear the Sunday night intro song, the Monday night football intro song. They give goosebumps to major fans, and that's the auditory component. But what about the visual, right? The visual when you walk into a stadium of a given sporting event with a packed stadium, lights are flaring. What else do? You hear sounds. The verbal, how a sports communicator, a broadcaster has their catchphrases, their slogans. We all know them. So effective communication is essential to the success and the growth of sports. So maybe if you think of something like, I don't know, the NFL, the WWE, these sports might have not have grown, and yes, I say WWE, to the levels that they have grown without effective communication skills. The WWE is a great one, right? There's been other wrestling federations, but how the WWE has had success is really probably how they've communicated it to the people. They absorb what the people want, and they in turn provide a product that the people consume. Sportuguese. So what do we mean by Sportuguese? This term that Tannenbaum and Noah have put out really is that sports communication is embedded part of our culture, where it influences how we think and how we speak. And this is on every single level, from politics to business to hanging out with your friends, whatever it is. We use catchphrases from sports in everyday language all the time. We talk about something being a slam dunk, meaning something is easy, or a Hail Mary. How many of you guys have went into an exam and didn't study at all and said, I'm just throwing up a Hail Mary, maybe I'll pass the exam, right? We use these examples of language all the time. Right, and another definition here, or explanation of communication, put out by Cassing. People enact, produce, consume, and organize sport primarily as a communicative activity. So we've got on 4 different levels, right? You could have people that engage. So once again, kind of jumping back to perspectives here, right? People engage for a variety of reasons, different perspectives. At the youth level, maybe it's because they want to play with their friends, or maybe it's because their parents are forcing them to participate in sports. So when you're viewing it, you're looking at their perspective. From me as a coach, and I'm looking at a young athlete, if I see somebody is just not having fun, but they're coming every single day, maybe I have to realize that maybe they're engaging it because they're being forced by a parent. At the professional level, maybe I like to think of the NBA as certain players who I won't name. You could just see they don't enjoy the sport like they maybe used to, but maybe they do it for the money, right? Don't get me wrong. There's some players that clearly love the sport. I think like LeBron James, he is a fan of the sport, loves the sport. It is obviously embedded in his life. There's other players who don't, and they are simply there for the money. I mean, certain players have admitted they're there for the money. Produce, right? People produce sports for a variety of reasons, financial being a major one. Consume, I think, is a very key one here, because most of us are probably not actively engaged in sports once we get beyond college, but most of us do consume sports. We are the consumers of it. So what does it mean? Why do we consume it? Like an NFL Sunday, right, where we're excited to watch it. Do we consume it as a fantasy football consumer? Do we consume sports as a parent, right? As you guys have kids, maybe you go to sports to watch your kids play, right? Who organizes sports, and why do they organize sports? Various organizations could have various mission statements from the, let's just say, professional level, right? At the end of the day, something like the NBA or the NFL, they're organizations that are designed to make money. But then you have things like the Catholic Youth Organization, right? To raise good Christians. I'm not sure what their mission statement is, but you should understand the point of even at these different levels of engaging, producing, consuming, and organizing, there's various perspectives of key stakeholders within these levels. Rooted in, right? So sports communication is rooted in all of these disciplines: sociology, anthropology, history, physiology, psychology, right? We have our roots. It's interdisciplinary, but probably sociology is the most important, at least for this class, where we're studying the development, structure, and functioning, of human society. That's the definition of sociology. And with this class, we're kind of studying the context in which sport has really evolved. Sports communication has evolved over the last 40, 50 years, right? But beyond that, clearly you should see that sports communication, communication in sport, is an interdisciplinary endeavor. We cannot discuss sports from a media lens without thinking about or discussing physiology, psychology, history. If you're looking at fantasy football, right, and fantasy football, you're deciding whether or not you want to play a player. What are some questions that might arise if you're participating in fantasy football? Okay, well, is there a designated injury report from this player? You're looking at the physiology. Psychology, okay, let's look at Tom Brady. Tom Brady, maybe he's having some issues with his wife, and does that come into play with playing that player? History, well, Tom Brady has the most decorated NFL player. He's the GOAT. He's the most decorated NFL player ever. So from that lens alone, you have to think about every single aspect. So I think, if you're a sports broadcaster, right, all of these things apply too. There's always a human element to sports, so as you can see, it's an interdisciplinary endeavor. The last thing on this slide I think is important. We're still in week 1, chapter 1. This text is not really meant to drive your career, so to speak, in sports communication. Instead, this text provides a philosophical lens to view sports communications. And that's different than some other classes. Like I teach an intro to kinesiology class where we're very focused on developing people's careers, and we talk about how much careers make or how much money they make, and various organizations that they have to get certifications or licenses from. That's not what this text is about. It is very philosophic in nature, but it's not to say that that can't help you in your career. I think if you become an effective sports communicator, that can absolutely help build your career because you can start to understand where people are coming from. All right, some definitions, which are always important. So the class is communication in sports, sports communication. We have to have a definition where the text defines communication in a broad term as transactional process in which people generate meaning through the exchange of verbal and nonverbal messages in specific context, influenced by individual and societal forces embedded in culture. So everything is context dependent, right? Communication is not just this product, right? It is a process rather than a product. All right, and I already said it is context dependent. When you always have to understand that background, that foundation from which people are conveying messages. Now, sports. How do we define sport? This is an interesting one. A repeatable, regulated, physical contest that produces a clear winner. So, this is always a good debate. Is chess a sport? All right, we know football, basketball, baseball, hockey. These are sports. Is chess a sport? It's repeatable. Chess has clear rules. It does not fall under the physical aspect of the contest. So we would argue that chess is probably not a sport. It's probably a game, but not a sport. Dance. What about dance? Dance can be repeatable. It can be regulated, governed by rules. Physical contest, absolutely, producing a clear winner. So we would say something like competitive dance, competitive cheer. These absolutely should be considered part of sports. Golf. We've seen some golfers who don't look like peak perfection when it comes to overall physique. Is golf a sport? Golf is absolutely repeatable. There's many rules in golf. It's regulated. We know how to win, how to lose, have the fewest strokes, right? Physical contest producing a clear winner. We always have winners in golf. Is it a physical contest? It depends on how you define physical. In my opinion, absolutely. If you've ever played golf, the amount of skill required to partake in golf is another level. And when you actually play golf, you get a much deeper appreciation for the professionals that partake in golf. So in my opinion, absolutely. Golf is a sport. Last one here. Esports. This was brought up in my kinesiology class as well. And I don't know where I stand here on esports. Repeatable, yes. Regulated, well, absolutely. There's rules in sports, whether it's esports, whether it's I don't know what esports people play nowadays. It's not my world. Do you play 2K for esports? I don't know. StarCraft, that's a thing. Minecraft, that's a thing. So I'm sure there's clear rules on these. Physical contest producing a clear winner. So we can produce a clear winner. Unless you're playing something like, I don't know, Dance Dance Revolution, Wii Sports, I don't think something like Call of Duty or Fortnite is a physical contest. So most esports, I would say, are probably not an actual sport. But I don't know. Maybe that'll change in the future with a metaverse that involves people like jumping around doing flips. If you've ever seen Ready Player One, maybe it becomes more true sport-like, requiring physical activity, which for the sake of obesity and overall health is probably a good thing. But you guys should get the clear point here. I think this definition works relatively well to clearly define sports. Chapter format. This is important, so you guys should know what to expect, especially because a massive part of your grade is doing certain assignments from the chapter, which you'll see on the next slide. But most of the chapter, I don't know, 80–85% of your chapter is just standard readings, which provides definitions. Many of the key ones I'll go over in the slides. You absolutely have to go over these things. But beyond that, there's really 4 special aspects of every single chapter other than chapter 1. They usually provide an interview with some sort of professional in the field. Chapter 1 provides an interview with Bob Costas. They will also give you an example that really kind of stokes the flames of a discussion. They can give you a case study, which we will absolutely be discussing some case studies that kind of bring home or wrap up the point of the given chapter. And finally, some theoretical example. So these are going to be key aspects for your assignments because most of your assignments for the semester are going to be based in 1, 2, or 3, probably 1 or 2 of these formats. So your first assignment, all right, what you're going to have to do is, from your world, think back to March of 2020, right? Explain how the removal of sports impacted your life. Now, it doesn't have to be how you consume sports, right? Maybe you were an athlete on a team. Maybe a significant other of yours was an athlete on a given team. I don't know, maybe you had a parent that is a hardcore fan and they were depressed and you had to deal with something like that, right? Just explain what this time period of March, April, May 2020 meant for you from the sports perspective. Okay. Obviously, we were all going through a lot, but what did sports mean to you at this time? And maybe it didn't. It meant very little. That's fine. You know, why did it mean very little for you? Kind of give us some groundwork. Next one, right? The chapter 1 provides an interview with Bob Costas, one of the greatest sports broadcasters there is. What I'd like you to do is read the entire interview. There is a wide range of questions in this interview listed on page 6. What I want you to do is address one of the questions as if the question was being asked to you, right? You know, he talks about the evolution of sports broadcasting. He talks about some more, what I'll say is controversial topics with Fox broadcasters discussing LeBron James. So I want you to address one of these questions as if it was being asked to you. And then the last part of this assignment, because this is going to be completed on the discussion board, is respond to one of the interview questions of a classmate. So within the discussion board, I want you to read someone else's response to number 2 and simply respond to it. I want you to, again, it doesn't have to be 3-4 paragraphs, but let me know what you think about that person's perspective. You can disagree. In fact, I think it's important in this class that you disagree with other people, but you should be disagreeing in a cordial manner. This is very important because it should be able to give you the ability to gain new perspective on how others view certain topics. And I will be the first one to put out my viewpoint on one of these questions. Feel free to respond to mine if you want, or disagree with mine. I think that'll make this class much more interesting. That is it for today. Until next week.